How this person survived 2 days trapped under an oil pipeline. Introduction. When Mike Travers woke up on the morning of August 16, 2023, he had no idea that his life was about to be turned upside down. Mike was a 34-year-old pipeline maintenance worker, used to the grueling, dirty work that kept oil flowing through miles of infrastructure in the remote parts of Alaska. He had faced many challenges during his decade-long career in the industry, but nothing could have prepared him for the harrowing experience that would unfold that day. The accident. Mike and his crew had been tasked with inspecting a section of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline that ran through a particularly remote and rugged area. The terrain was unforgiving, with dense forests, steep ravines, and muddy bogs that made access difficult. But the job had to be done. Mike was responsible for checking for leaks and corrosion, a routine part of his day. As the team set up their equipment, disaster struck. A sudden landslide, triggered by heavy rains the night before, sent tons of earth and debris cascading down the slope where they were working. The crew scrambled for safety, but Mike wasn't fast enough. A massive chunk of dirt and rock hit him square in the back, knocking him off his feet and pinning him beneath a section of the oil pipeline. The world went black as the pipeline collapsed on top of him, pressing him into the wet ground. When Mike came to, he was trapped. His legs were pinned, and he could barely move his upper body. Worse yet, the communication radio he carried was out of reach, just inches from his fingertips. He was alone, buried under tons of steel and dirt. Day 1. The realization. The first few hours were a blur of pain and confusion. Mike screamed for help, hoping that his crew would hear him and return. But the landslide had cut off their access, and they had assumed he was safe when they regrouped further down the pipeline. They wouldn't realize he was missing until later that day. As the hours dragged on, Mike's initial panic subsided, replaced by a grim realization. He was truly stuck. The crushing weight of the pipeline made it nearly impossible to move. Every breath was a struggle, and the constant pressure on his legs sent waves of agony through his body. But Mike wasn't a quitter. He knew that his only chance of survival was to stay calm and conserve his energy. He forced himself to take slow, shallow breaths, doing his best to ignore the pain. With no food, water, or shelter, he had to make his body last as long as possible. Day 2. Fighting for survival. By the second day, Mike's situation had become dire. Dehydration and exhaustion were setting in. His mouth was dry, and his lips were cracked from lack of water. The temperature had dropped overnight, and Mike shivered uncontrollably in the cold, damp earth. But he still clung to hope. He knew that his crew would eventually realize he was missing and come looking for him. He just had to hold on until then. To distract himself from the pain, Mike focused on small tasks. He dug at the dirt around him with his fingers, trying to create a bit more space to relieve the pressure on his chest. He mentally recited survival tips he had learned over the years. Stay calm, stay positive, and never give up. Hours turned into what felt like an eternity. Mike's mind began to play tricks on him as delirium set in. He imagined hearing voices and seeing lights, but every time he opened his eyes, he was met with darkness and silence. The weight of the pipeline seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute.
The rescue. Just when Mike's strength was about to give out, salvation arrived. On the afternoon of the second day, his crew finally realized that something was wrong. They hadn't seen or heard from Mike since the landslide, and they immediately launched a search and rescue operation. Using drones and thermal imaging cameras, they scoured the area for signs of life.
When they finally found him, Mike was barely conscious. The rescue team worked quickly, using hydraulic equipment to carefully lift the pipeline off his body. Paramedics were on the scene, stabilizing Mike before airlifting him to a nearby hospital. Miraculously, Mike survived the ordeal. Despite severe dehydration, hypothermia, and multiple fractures in his legs, he made a full recovery after several weeks of medical care and rehabilitation. Doctors credited his survival to his calm demeanor and his ability to conserve his energy under extreme conditions.
Aftermath. Mike's story became a sensation, capturing the attention of news outlets and social media across the country. He was hailed as a hero, not just for surviving but for his sheer determination to stay alive. For Mike, the experience was life-changing. He had always been a tough, no-nonsense worker, but surviving 2 days trapped under an oil pipeline had given him a new appreciation for life.
I just kept thinking about my family, my friends, and all the things I still wanted to do, Mike said in an interview after his recovery. That's what kept me going. I wasn't ready to give up, no matter how bad it got.
Mike returned to work a few months later, but with a new perspective on life. He became an advocate for workplace safety and emergency preparedness, sharing his story with others in the industry. His near-death experience had taught him that life is fragile, and that even in the darkest moments, hope and resilience can carry you through. Mike Traver's incredible survival story is a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Trapped beneath an oil pipeline for 2 days, with no food, water, or way to call for help, he refused to give up. His strength, determination, and will to survive ultimately saved his life, inspiring countless others with his bravery and resilience.
Mike's journey after the ordeal, physical recovery. After the dramatic rescue, Mike's battle wasn't over. His physical recovery was long and grueling. He spent weeks in the hospital, undergoing surgeries to repair his fractured legs and addressing the internal bruising caused by the crushing weight of the pipeline. The doctors informed him that he was lucky to avoid more serious complications, such as internal bleeding or severe organ damage, which could have been fatal given the circumstances. Physical therapy was the next step. It was difficult for Mike, a man who had always prided himself on his physical strength and independence, to suddenly be dependent on others for even the simplest tasks. Learning to walk again was a slow process. His legs were weak from both the injuries and the days of being trapped with little circulation. But with each session of therapy, Mike grew stronger, determined to regain full mobility. The medical staff was amazed at his resilience. They often commented on how his positive attitude helped him heal faster than expected. "You don't go through something like that and come out the same person," Mike would tell them. "I had a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it." Emotional and mental recovery. While Mike's physical recovery was challenging, the emotional scars ran just as deep. The trauma of being trapped, helpless, and facing death for 2 days lingered long after his body began to heal. He experienced nightmares and flashbacks of the landslide, reliving the moment when he was buried beneath the pipeline. For weeks after the rescue, he would wake up in a cold sweat, feeling the weight of the steel pressing down on him again. Mike's family and friends encouraged him to seek therapy, but like many people in his line of work, he was hesitant at first. Talking about his feelings wasn't something he was used to. However, after one particularly vivid nightmare, he realized that he needed help. Therapy helped Mike come to terms with the trauma he had experienced. His therapist guided him through techniques to manage his anxiety and flashbacks. Gradually, the nightmares became less frequent, and Mike began to reclaim control over his mental state. Mike also joined a support group for trauma survivors, where he connected with others who had experienced life-threatening situations. Hearing their stories and sharing his own made him feel less alone in his recovery. He found solace in knowing that others understood the psychological aftermath of survival. Becoming an advocate for safety as Mike healed, he became increasingly passionate about safety in the oil industry. He knew that his accident, while caused by a natural disaster, also highlighted the dangers of working in hazardous environments. Mike wanted to ensure that what happened to him would never happen to anyone else. He began speaking at industry conferences, sharing his story with other workers, safety officers, and company executives. His message was clear. Safety protocols aren't just rules on paper. They save lives. Mike emphasized the importance of thorough training, regular safety drills, and the use of advanced technology to prevent accidents.